Welcome everyone to Catholic Sunday Scriptures in Context. Today, the video focuses on Easter Sunday, April 17th, 2022. First of all, I want to wish all of you a happy Easter and thank you for subscribing to these videos. Our first reading today comes from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 10. Peter is proclaiming the word to a group of non-Jews. Cornelius is a centurion in the Roman army, and he is a believer in God and helps the local Jewish community by giving alms to them. The event that's recorded here has been edited, certainly, and it seems that the speech that Peter is giving, even though it's directed to a non-Jewish community, certainly has some editing that changes the normal writing of Luke, but it is substantially correct, we believe. Peter gives a summary of the ministry of Jesus, starting with John the Baptist. And what Peter makes clear is that the events have been witnessed by the select people, especially the apostles, and that they now have an obligation to proclaim this to all peoples. Peter says everyone who believes in him will receive forgiveness. And so he calls on the household of Cornelius to believe and be baptized. Our takeaways from this reading are that the leadership of Peter is driven home. It's clear that he is the leader among the apostles. Also, Peter mentions that it has been 3 days that Jesus was in the tomb, so that this is definitely a resurrection and not a resuscitation of somebody who may temporarily have died. Peter talks about his genuine physical experiences of having eaten and been in the presence of Jesus after the resurrection. So this is not some kind of fantasy of his or the other apostles. They are certainly witnesses to all they have seen, and that they are now compelled to proclaim this to others. The saving act of God in Jesus demands a response. They must proclaim the good news. As he says in the reading, he commissioned us to preach to the people, and so they carry out this mission that they have received. And it is obvious that God brought about this meeting by Peter and Cornelius through a series of visions and dreams that he gave to the two of them. Our second reading is from Paul's letter to the Colossians. So Paul was not the one who founded this community, but they are writing to him because they have some concerns. It involves what's known as syncretism. Syncretism is when you borrow elements from another religion and incorporate them into your own. And the early Christians were incorporating some parts of Jewish mysticism, which involved angels that relayed messages, and they were part of the Godhead, and it was very confusing. And Paul warns them to avoid this kind of syncretism because it is diluting the true message of Christianity. And what he talks about is that their focus must be on Christ, the sufficiency of Christ. They don't need any of this other stuff that's being brought in from Judaism, because God has put full power into Christ. And the fullness of new life will appear at the end of time. While there is a present part to it, there is still more to come. And so our takeaways from this reading is that this passage expresses the fundamentals about the resurrection and the transformation that is yet to come. And he talks about a second coming. To think about what is above are his exact words. And he reminds them that we are all joined to Christ in baptism, and that we will experience the fullness of all that Christ desires for us. And it is this idea of already, but not yet. The resurrection is the already part, that we've experienced the fullness of God's love, but there is a manifestation, a fullness of creation that is yet to come. It is time for the Alleluia again. We have been deprived of it during Lent, and now it is our time to rejoice. Our last reading is from the Gospel of John, And this is the great sign, the beginning of salvation, the empty tomb. So it is a moment of belief. I guess we need to be clear that there are no witnesses, physical witnesses, to the resurrection event itself, but only to the resurrected Christ. Because if it were witnessed by people, it would be an event of reason and not of faith. And what makes the resurrection such an excellent moment in the history of the world is that it is pure faith. It is not based on reason. It truly exhibits belief in God. For John, the passion, death, and resurrection are all one event. And through the resurrection, Jesus shares with us his victory over sin and death. And so our takeaways from this gospel: at the beginning, John mentions the first day of the week. John is alluding to the beginning of a new era, a new creation, now that Christ has risen from the dead. He talks about it as early in the morning, while it was still dark, there was a lack of faith in our world, and with the resurrection, that will now come to an end. Certainly, Peter is given preeminence here, that even though the beloved disciple arrives at the tomb first, he waits before going in so that Peter can get there first. The beloved disciple, because he is loved, is the one who is the first to experience and to understand and to believe. And the signs that this resurrection has taken place gradually are in the way that John tells the story. Mary Magdalene sees that the stone has been rolled away, so she runs to tell the disciples. And they come and they see that the tomb is empty. And as they venture into the tomb, the first thing they see are the burial cloths. And then lastly, as Peter fully enters in, he sees that the cloth that was covering the head was folded and set aside from the rest, and that this mystery of the resurrection occurs a step at a time as it happens in our life of faith. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Please continue to pray for peace, pray for the refugees, pray for Ukraine. And if you think this video may be helpful to anyone, please share it. Again, have a very happy Easter.